The sun bled orange across the Texas horizon as Lila Bennett stepped off the faded Greyhound bus, her boots crunching against the dusty gravel. The air smelled of hay, heat, and freedom, three things she hadn't known in far too long. She stood there for a long moment, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder, watching the bus disappear in a cloud of dirt. It carried away the last trace of her old life, her name, her reputation, her fear. Lila wasn't really Lila Bennett, of course. That name belonged to a forged ID she'd bought from a trucker in a rest stop 2 states over. But she liked the sound of it. Strong, simple, untraceable. Everything her real name was not. Just a month earlier, she'd been living in Houston, surrounded by wealth and luxury. Designer dresses, charity galas, champagne nights, all of it felt like a different lifetime. But behind those glittering smiles was a prison she could no longer endure. Her fiancé, Evan Cole, wasn't the charming businessman he appeared to be. He was controlling, dangerous, and cruel in ways that didn't leave visible scars. And when she accidentally overheard him discussing an accident meant for one of his rivals, she knew she couldn't stay. That night, with trembling hands, she emptied her purse of credit cards and jewelry, replaced them with cash from Evan's safe, and ran. She didn't look back. Now standing in the small town of Sagebrush Valley, she clutched the paper ad she'd torn from a bulletin board at a diner 2 towns away. Help wanted, ranch hand, room and board included. No experience necessary. Ask for Bo Whitaker, it sounded perfect. She didn't know the first thing about ranching, but she knew how to work hard. And most importantly, it was far from the glittering skyline of Houston. The Whitaker Ranch sat at the end of a long dirt road, miles from the nearest neighbor. The land stretched endlessly. Fences, open fields, and a weathered barn silhouetted against the sinking sun. Lila hesitated at the gate, nerves twisting in her stomach. She was out of her depth, but she'd made it this far by pretending she belonged. She could do it again. When she finally met Bo Whitaker, the man who owned the ranch, her first thought was that he looked carved from the land itself. Broad shoulders, sun-darkened skin, and eyes the color of storm clouds over wheat fields. He spoke little, his voice low and even, like someone who didn't waste words. "You here for the job?" he asked, giving her a long, unreadable look. "Yes, sir," she managed, gripping the strap of her bag. "I can work hard, I just need a chance." He studied her. Her soft hands, her 2 clean clothes, the hesitation in her voice. He could tell she wasn't a ranch hand, not yet. But something in her expression, something fragile but determined, made him nod. "You start tomorrow," he said finally. "We'll see how you do." He turned away and Lila exhaled in relief, her chest tight with gratitude. He didn't ask for references. He didn't pry. Maybe he sensed that she needed a place to start over, and maybe he didn't care why. That night, lying in the small bunkhouse under a thin quilt, Lila stared at the ceiling and listened to the crickets outside. The silence was foreign but comforting. For the first time in months, she felt safe. But even as sleep claimed her, the past whispered at the edge of her thoughts. The memory of Evan's voice, the fear in her chest, the knowledge that he wouldn't stop looking for her. She pressed her hand against the locket she still wore, the only thing she'd kept from her old life, and promised herself that this time, she wouldn't run again. The ranch was her chance at peace. What she didn't know was that her new life, and her new boss, carried secrets just as deep as her own. Morning came early at the Whitaker Ranch, with the sound of roosters crowing and horses stamping in their stalls. Lila Bennett woke before dawn, her body stiff from the narrow bunk but her spirit steadier than it had been in months. She pulled on borrowed jeans, an old flannel shirt, and work boots that didn't quite fit. Through the small window, she saw the first streaks of pink spreading across the Texas sky. The day felt new, brutally, beautifully new. When she stepped outside, she found Bo Whitaker already at work, coiling a rope near the corral. He stood tall in the pale morning light, his movements slow but sure, like every action had a purpose. He wore a faded denim shirt, sleeves rolled up, and his Stetson-shaded eyes that missed nothing. "Morning," she called softly. He glanced up, nodding once. "You're early." "That's good. Let's see what you can do." His tone wasn't unfriendly, but it wasn't warm either. It was calm, practical, the way a man spoke to a storm he'd seen coming for years. Bo was a man of few words and even fewer smiles. To most folks in Sagebrush Valley, he was a mystery. Some said he'd been rich once, born into money, but turned his back on it after his father died. Others whispered that he'd lost someone he loved and never recovered. Bo didn't confirm or deny any of it. He just worked, day after day, keeping his land alive with quiet devotion. The Whitaker Ranch had once been the largest in the county, passed down through generations. But by the time Bo inherited it, most of the acres had been sold off. He could have restored the place easily, if he'd wanted to use the fortune sitting in trust under his name. But Bo Whitaker wanted nothing from that life. He'd seen what money could do, how greed tore families apart, how people's hearts hardened when the world treated wealth like worth. So he stayed here among the dust and cattle, building a life by the strength of his own hands, and now somehow, he'd hired a woman who looked like she belonged anywhere but here. He watched Lila struggle to carry hay bales, her arms trembling with the effort. She was trying hard, not whining, not giving up, but she was clearly out of her depth. Still, she met every task with quiet determination. When one of the horses spooked and nearly threw her, she steadied it with surprising gentleness, murmuring soft words that seemed to calm the animal instantly. Bo noticed. He noticed everything. By mid-morning, he offered her a canteen of water. "You did all right," he said simply. "Just all right?" she asked with a tired grin, wiping sweat from her forehead. A hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. "We'll see if you're still standing tomorrow before I promote you." It was the first time she saw something close to a smile from him. Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm formed between them. Lila learned to saddle horses, mend fences, and drive the old ranch truck. Bo never praised her outright, but when he left her in charge of feeding the animals one morning, she recognized it for what it was, a small gesture of trust. At night, she sometimes heard him outside the bunkhouse, walking the property line with his dog. The moonlight caught the silver in his hair, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she found his solitude comforting. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that Bo was hiding something. His office door was always locked, his phone calls rare and hushed. There was a depth in his eyes, a shadow that told her he carried burdens of his own. Lila didn't dare ask. She had secrets too, ones that could shatter this fragile peace, and so, beneath the endless Texas sky, two souls worked side by side, one running from her past, the other hiding from his own, each unaware that their secrets were already drawing them toward each other like magnets in the dust. By the third week, Lila Bennett had blisters on her palms and soreness in muscles she hadn't known existed. The city had softened her once, but the ranch was hardening her back into something strong. Every sunrise brought a new challenge: broken fences to mend, feed to haul, cattle to guide. And though she still stumbled, she refused to quit. At first, Bo Whitaker kept his distance. He spoke only when necessary, offering brief instructions and silent observations. But as the days stretched into weeks, something subtle began to shift between them. He started to linger after giving her directions, watching as she found her rhythm. He noticed how she laughed softly to herself when she finally managed to throw a proper loop with the lasso, or how she whispered to the horses as if they were old friends. One afternoon, while trying to fix a water trough, Lila slipped in the mud and fell backward with a splash that sent Bo into rare laughter. Low and warm, the kind of sound that could melt ice. Startled, Lila laughed too, wiping water from her face. For a brief, glowing moment, the ranch didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like home. That evening, a thunderstorm rolled over the valley. The wind howled against the windows and rain lashed the tin roofs. Lila was in the bunkhouse when the power went out, plunging everything into darkness. She grabbed a lantern and made her way toward the main house. Hoping to find candles or instructions, she found Bo instead, sitting at the kitchen table with a single lantern lit. The golden light painted the room in soft shadows, flickering against the lines of his face. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable but not unkind. "Power's out," he said quietly. "You scared of storms?" "Not the thunder," she said, setting her lantern beside his. "Just the dark." He nodded as if he understood more than she said. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the rain drum against the roof. Lila wrapped her hands around a cup of coffee he'd poured for her. It was strong, bitter, grounding. "Why'd you come here?" he asked suddenly. Her heart thudded. "Just needed a change," she said carefully. He didn't push. "Most people who end up here are either running from something or looking for something." She forced a small smile. "Maybe both." Bo studied her face, the flickering lantern catching in her eyes. There was something haunted there, but also brave. He'd seen fear before. On men in war, on widows, on himself. But Lila's fear was wrapped in steel. Whoever she was fighting to survive. When the wind howled louder, she flinched. Without a word, Bo stood and checked the windows, making sure they were latched. His quiet protectiveness steadied her heartbeat in a way she didn't expect. After a while, the storm eased, leaving only the sound of distant thunder. Lila leaned back in her chair, exhaustion softening her. "You ever get tired of all this?" she asked. "The isolation?" Bo gave a faint smile. "The land doesn't lie to you. That's more than I can say for most people." She wanted to ask what he meant, but the heaviness in his tone told her not to. Instead, she simply nodded, understanding more in silence than she could have in words. That night, when she returned to her bunk, the storm outside had faded, but inside her, something new had begun. A fragile trust, a quiet bond born not from shared stories but from shared silence. She didn't know it yet, but that night by the lantern would be the beginning of something deeper, something that would test both her courage and his secrets in ways neither of them could yet imagine. For a while, Lila Bennett allowed herself to believe she'd outrun her past. The days at the Whitaker Ranch settled into a steady rhythm, early mornings, long hours, and quiet evenings that smelled of hay and rain. She'd grown stronger, tougher, more at peace. Her nightmares came less often now, and when they did, she woke to the sound of horses outside instead of city sirens. But peace never lasted long for someone who'd built her new life on a lie. It began subtly, with a feeling more than a fact. A flicker of unease that crawled up Lila's spine one afternoon while she was mending fences near the southern field. She looked up, certain she'd seen a dark vehicle on the ridge beyond the property, the flash of a black SUV before it disappeared in a swirl of dust. It could have been nothing, just a passing traveler, but something about it chilled her blood. For the rest of the day, she couldn't shake the sense that eyes were on her. When she told Bo Whitaker that evening, he studied her carefully. "You sure it wasn't one of the hands from the neighboring ranch?" "Maybe," she said quickly, though her voice trembled. "It just felt wrong." He nodded slowly. "I'll keep an eye out," and he did. Over the next few days, Bo grew even more protective, his eyes scanning the horizon more often, his voice low when he gave her new tasks that conveniently kept her closer to the main house. Lila appreciated it, even as it terrified her. She didn't want to drag anyone into her mess, especially not Bo. Still, it was impossible to ignore the tension humming beneath the surface. One evening, when she was bringing in the horses, she saw Bo standing near the barn, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a low, controlled tone. His words carried authority, almost command. "I don't care what the board says," he said quietly. "Keep it quiet and move the funds as planned." Funds? Board? The word struck her like a jolt. Later that night, when Bo went to check the generators before a coming storm, curiosity got the better of her. She slipped into the ranch house, moving quietly past the kitchen and into the office she'd always seen locked. This time the door was slightly ajar. Inside, the room looked nothing like the rest of the ranch. No rough wood or worn furniture. Everything here was sleek. Dark mahogany, polished steel, and computer screens displaying numbers and names she didn't understand. File drawers labeled Whitaker Holdings and stock transfer records lined the walls. On the desk sat a thick leather ledger, embossed with the initials BW. Lila's breath caught as she flipped through it. Page after page detailed real estate investments and company acquisitions worth millions. Bo Whitaker, the quiet cowboy who lived like a simple ranch hand, was secretly one of the wealthiest men in Texas. A floorboard creaked behind her. "What are you doing in here?" Bo's voice was calm, but the steel in it made her freeze. She turned slowly, guilt and confusion warring in her eyes. "I heard you on the phone. I didn't understand. You live like this place is falling apart," and his jaw tightened. "Because I want it that way." Lila swallowed hard. "You're hiding all of this, why?" He hesitated before replying, his voice low and rough. "Because money destroyed my family. I made a promise to never let it touch my life again." His eyes softened slightly, but his tone didn't. "You shouldn't have been in here." "I'm sorry," she whispered, shame burning her cheeks. I thought you were hiding something dangerous." "I am," he said quietly. "But not what you think." She wanted to explain herself, to tell him about Evan and the life she'd escaped, but fear sealed her lips. Beau's trust, the fragile bond they'd built, had just cracked wide open, and as thunder rolled across the valley, neither of them knew that the danger Lila feared was already on its way, closer than either of them realized. The air on the ranch felt heavier after that night, thick with things unsaid. Lila Bennett went about her chores quietly, avoiding Beau Whitaker whenever she could. He didn't push her, but his silence was louder than any argument. Gone was the easy rhythm they'd shared, the quiet trust built over lantern light and laughter. Now every glance felt like a question neither dared to ask. Lila tried to convince herself she'd done the right thing. She'd only gone into his office because she was scared, because she thought her past had caught up to her. But still, she'd crossed a line, and Beau wasn't the kind of man who forgave betrayal easily. 3 days later, the dam finally broke. It was just after sundown. Lila was finishing up in the stables when Beau appeared in the doorway, his frame outlined against the fading light. He looked calm, but there was a storm in his eyes. "Got a minute?" he asked quietly. Lila wiped her hands on her jeans, heart pounding. "Sure." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the faint scent of leather and rain. "Why were you in my office, Lila?" Her breath hitched. She'd practiced her excuses, but now they all sounded weak. I heard you on the phone. You sounded like what?" he pressed. "Like you were hiding something dangerous," she said softly. "And I panicked. I've been running from someone for months, and when I saw those files, She stopped, shaking her head. "I shouldn't have gone in. I'm sorry." Beau's eyes narrowed, not in anger but confusion. "Running from someone?" Her chest tightened. She'd said too much. But it was too late to turn back now. "I wasn't honest when I came here," she began, her voice trembling. "My name isn't really Lila Bennett. I left a man, a powerful one. My ex-fiancé, Evan Cole. He hurt people, Beau, he hurt me. And when I found out what he was involved in, illegal deals, threats, I ran. I've been looking over my shoulder ever since." Beau's jaw clenched. "And you think he's looking for you?" "I know he is," she whispered. "I saw one of his men near town last week. That's why I panicked. I thought maybe this was part of it." For a long moment, Beau said nothing. The wind howled softly through the open barn doors, carrying the scent of hay and storm clouds. Finally, he spoke. "I don't give a damn what name you came here under," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "If you're in trouble, you tell me. You don't sneak around and assume the worst." Tears pricked her eyes. "I didn't want to drag you into it." "Too late for that," he said quietly. "You already have." His words hit her like a blow, not cruel, just painfully true. She turned away, brushing at her cheeks. "You don't understand. Evan doesn't stop. He'll destroy anyone who helps me." Beau stepped forward, his hand hesitating before settling gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to fight him alone, Lila." Her breath caught at the sound of her real name on his lips. It felt both terrifying and freeing. "You'd risk yourself for me?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. "I don't take kindly to men who hurt women," he said, "and I've got resources you don't know about." Lila almost smiled, remembering the ledgers in his office. "I noticed." That earned the faintest glint of amusement in his eyes. "Guess it's time I stop pretending I'm broke." They stood there for a long time, the distance between them closing inch by inch. For the first time, everything was out in the open. The lies, the fear, the truth. It was messy, fragile, but real. Then Beau's phone buzzed on his belt. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. "What is it?" she asked. He looked up slowly, his eyes sharp with warning. A black SUV just pulled into town. The blood drained from her face. "He's here." Beau's jaw set like iron. Then he picked the wrong ranch to come to. The night felt unnaturally still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Lila Bennett stood by the barn door, staring out into the darkness. The distant hum of an engine echoed across the open fields, growing louder, closer. Her pulse quickened. She knew that sound, smooth, powerful, expensive. Evan Cole never traveled without making a statement. Beau Whitaker moved with quiet precision, his every action deliberate. He locked the barn, checked the rifles stored in his truck, and called one of the deputies he trusted in town. "We might have trouble out here," he said into the phone. "Keep it off the books for now." The deputy knew better than to ask questions. Beau Whitaker's name carried weight in Sagebrush Valley, though few knew just how much. "Stay inside," Beau told Lila. his voice steady but firm. "No," she said immediately, stepping forward. "You can't face him alone. He's dangerous." "I've dealt with worse," Bo said, grabbing his hat from the hook by the door, "and I'm not letting him near you." For a heartbeat, they locked eyes, their unspoken fear tangled with something fiercer, deeper. Lila wanted to trust him completely, but years of being hunted had taught her to expect betrayal. Still, there was something about Bo, the grounded strength, the quiet conviction, that made her believe he meant it when he said he'd protect her. Headlights cut through the darkness as the SUV stopped at the front gate. The metal creaked open and 3 men stepped out, dressed in suits that didn't belong in a place like this. Evan Cole followed behind them, perfectly composed, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Sweetheart," he called out, his voice smooth and venomous. "You had me worried sick." Lila's stomach turned. She hadn't heard that voice in months, but it still wrapped around her like barbed wire. She stayed hidden behind Bo's truck, hands trembling. Bo stepped out from the shadows, posture loose but ready. "You're trespassing," he said flatly. "Turn around and leave," Evan's smirk widened. "And you must be the cowboy my runaway bride's been playing house with." He glanced around the property with disdain. "Nice place, quaint. Shame it's about to become a crime scene." Bo didn't flinch. "You won't touch her." Evan laughed, the sound hollow. "You think you can stop me? Do you even know who I am?" "I know enough," Bo said. "And I've already made a few calls. Sheriff's on his way." Evan's confident mask cracked for just a second. "You made a mistake getting involved in this, rancher." He gestured for his men to move forward. Before they could, Bo's security lights blazed to life. Motion sensors he'd installed long ago. The sudden glare startled the men, giving him just enough time to draw his rifle and aim squarely at the dirt near Evan's feet. The shot rang out, echoing across the valley. Dust exploded upward and the men froze. "Next one won't miss," Bo said coldly. For a moment no one moved. Then from the distance sirens began to wail, growing louder by the second. Bo's deputy had arrived faster than expected. Evan's eyes flashed with fury. "You think this is over?" he hissed. "You can't hide her forever." Bo stepped closer, his voice calm but deadly. "She's not hiding anymore." As the deputies pulled up, Lila stepped out from her cover. Her whole body shook, but she stood tall. "You don't control me anymore, Evan," she said, her voice steady despite the tears burning her eyes. Evan sneered but didn't reply as the officers surrounded him and his men. One of them read his rights, and in the red-blue strobe of police lights, Lila finally saw the man who had once terrified her looking small, defeated. When the cars drove away, Bo lowered his rifle and turned to her. "You okay?" She nodded weakly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I am now." He reached out, brushing his thumb gently across her face. "You're safe, Lila. He's gone." But deep down they both knew this wasn't just about being safe. The confrontation had changed everything. The walls between them had fallen, and in their place stood something raw, honest, and real. For the first time in years, Lila felt like she could breathe again. And as dawn began to touch the horizon, she realized the ranch wasn't just her hiding place anymore. It was home. The morning after Evan Cole's arrest, the ranch was bathed in quiet gold. The storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean, the earth damp, the sky soft with sunrise. But inside Lila Bennett, the storm still lingered. She'd faced her past and survived. But now came the part she'd never learned how to do: live free. Bo Whitaker was up before dawn, as always, feeding the horses and checking fences like nothing had happened. But when Lila stepped outside, she noticed something different about him. A looseness in his shoulders, a faint peace in his eyes. The night before had stripped them both bare. There were no more lies, no more masks, only the truth. "Did you sleep?" Bo asked, his tone gentle but knowing. "A little," she admitted, hugging her arms around herself. "It feels strange not having to look over my shoulder." "That's a good kind of strange," he said with a half smile. For a moment, they stood side by side, the sounds of morning all around them, the lowing of cattle, the creak of the barn door, the rustle of wind through the grass. Then Bo turned to her, his voice low. "You don't have to stay here anymore, Lila. If you want to go, you're free to." She blinked, startled. "You want me to leave?" He shook his head. "No, but I won't be another man who tells you what to do. You've had enough of that." His words hit her harder than she expected. Freedom had always been her dream. But now, looking at him, the man who'd risked everything to protect her. She realized freedom didn't have to mean being alone. "I don't want to go," she said softly. "Not anymore." Beau's gaze lingered on her face, searching for the truth in her words. "Then stay," he said simply. They spent the rest of the morning fixing a broken section of fencing, working side by side like they had before everything went wrong. The sun climbed higher and laughter returned to the air, hesitant at first, then easy, natural. Lila hadn't laughed like that in years. Later, over lunch in the shade of the porch, Beau finally opened up. "You were right about me hiding something," he said. "The money, the business, it's all still there. I just stopped caring about it a long time ago." "Because of your family?" she asked gently. He nodded. "When my father died, my brothers fought over the inheritance. The ranch was supposed to be our legacy, but it turned into a battleground. I walked away from all of it. Started over out here. Figured if I lived simple, maybe I'd stay honest." Lila smiled faintly. "You think money makes people dishonest?" "I think it tempts them to forget who they are." She studied him for a long moment, seeing not just the stoic rancher but the man beneath, the one who carried scars invisible to the eye. "You're the most honest man I've ever met, Beau." His jaw tightened and he looked away as if embarrassed by the sincerity in her voice. "You give me too much credit." "I don't think I give you enough," she said softly. For the first time, Beau didn't deflect. He just looked at her, really looked at her. The woman who had come to him broken and afraid now stood steady, strong, her eyes clear. That night, under the wide stretch of stars, Beau walked with her to the pasture. The horses grazed quietly, their silhouettes silvered by moonlight. "Funny," she said, gazing at the horizon. "I came here to disappear, but I think I finally found myself instead." Beau's voice was low, steady. "Sometimes running brings you right where you were meant to be." She turned toward him, their eyes meeting in the dark. There was no need for words after that. When he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. For the first time, Lila wasn't running from something. She was walking toward someone, and for once that felt like home. Spring came early to Sagebrush Valley, painting the fields in wildflowers and gold. The Whitaker Ranch was alive again. Fences mended, barns freshly painted, laughter echoing through the open air. But for Lila Bennett, it wasn't just the land that had been restored. It was her heart. Months had passed since the night Evan Cole had been arrested. His empire of deceit had crumbled fast, and the truth of his crimes made headlines across the state. Lila's real name had come out in the investigation, but Beau had made sure the town saw her not as the woman who ran, but the woman who fought back. With Beau's quiet influence and the sheriff's help, she was cleared of every accusation and free at last, to start over on her own terms, and start over she did. Every morning, she woke before dawn not out of fear but purpose. She'd taken over the care of the ranch's rescued horses, turning an old stable into a sanctuary. Some of the animals were broken, skittish like she once had been, but under her patient touch they healed. She named the first mare Hope. The program grew quickly. Beau funded the renovations quietly, never asking for credit, just smiling when Lila showed him the ledgers and said, "We're doing good work, Beau, real good work." One afternoon, she found him out by the fence watching the horizon. His hat was tipped low, the breeze ruffling the collar of his shirt. "You still check the fields like they're going to run away," she teased, stepping beside him. He smiled faintly. "Old habits." Then after a pause, "You ever miss the city?" "Not for a second. Not even the fancy parties and champagne?" he asked, smirking a little. She laughed. "I've got horses and coffee now. I'm good." Beau's smile softened, but there was something thoughtful in his gaze. "You know, I thought this ranch was all I'd ever need. Turns out it wasn't the land that made it home." Her breath caught. "What was it then?" "You," he said simply. The word hung in the air, quiet but sure, as steady as his heartbeat. Lila didn't answer right away. She didn't have to. She just stepped closer, slipping her hand into his. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, the ranch came alive with friends, workers, and neighbors. Beau had insisted on a gathering, a small celebration for the new rescue program's success. There was food, laughter, music drifting through the warm air. For once, Lila didn't shy away from attention. She stood among them, smiling easily, light in her eyes. At some point, Beau found her by the porch, a faint flush on her cheeks from dancing. "You look happy," he said. I am, she replied, her voice steady and soft. You made me believe I could be again. He shook his head. No, Lila. You did that yourself. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. Maybe. But you gave me a place to remember who I was. He wrapped an arm around her, holding her close as the stars began to bloom overhead. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the ranch had gone quiet again, they walked down to the pasture together. The horses stirred gently, their breath visible in the cool air. This place saved me, she whispered. Bo turned to her, his expression soft. No, he said. You saved yourself. This place just gave you room to do it, she smiled, tears glimmering in her eyes. Then maybe we both got a second chance. Maybe we did. They stood in the silence of the Texas night, hands entwined, the wide sky stretching endlessly above them. The same land that had once been her hiding place was now her forever home. And as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, Lila realized the truth she'd been running from all along. She hadn't escaped her old life just to survive. She'd done it to begin again.